The voice shouldn't have known my name, yet it rose from the darkness like it had been waiting for me since before I was born. The sound slithered through the cabin walls, soft enough to doubt but sharp enough to freeze every thought in place. And the submarine seemed to tighten around me, as though the metal itself felt the intruder. Shadows stretched over the consoles in trembling lines, and the air carried a cold weight that made each breath feel stolen rather than taken. A low vibration rolled through the floor, a pulse that didn't match the engines, almost like a knock from something learning the rhythm of our hearts. The silence between echoes filled with a pressure that felt aware, watching, patient, and every flicker of light hinted at something outside shifting against the hull. As the sound rose again, broken, pleading, impossible, I felt an unease coiled deep inside, whispering that whatever called out from the depths was not trying to reach the vessel, but me. The hum beneath the floorboards deepened into something more like a pulse than machinery, steady yet strained, and each vibration carried a faint reminder of that whisper curling through the dark hours before. The metal walls felt closer now, the air thicker, as if the deep itself pushed inward with slow patience. Every flicker of light stretched shadows across the console, warping their shape until they looked like something reaching. I tried focusing on the shifting readings, but the numbers wavered as though the vessel drifted through a place that bent more than pressure. The feeling of being watched grew sharper, lurking in the corners where the lights dimmed, and I sensed the silence waiting to break again with something I didn't want to hear. The first knock was faint enough to dismiss, a tiny tap in the metal like a wandering echo. But the second struck with a force that rolled through the deck and tightened the air in my chest. Shadows wavered on the walls, shifting as though something traced its fingers along the outside of the hull, learning the shape of the vessel, 1 inch at a time. Each quiet second in between grew heavier, pressing in with a strange expectancy, and something in the stillness felt aware of my hesitation. When the third knock came, sharper, closer, it carried a rhythm that didn't feel random at all, as though something out there tried to speak in the only language it had left. The radio crackled with a soft hiss that rose and fell like uneven breathing, each shallow burst, scraping through the quiet as though something on the other end struggled to force its way through. I hovered close, unsure if I wanted to understand the broken shapes of sound twisting beneath the static, and the cramped cabin seemed to shrink with every shift in the noise. Dust drifted in the thin beam of the overhead light, while the shadows clung to the corners, as if listening with me. A faint whisper teased the edge of the signal, gone the moment I leaned in, leaving a silence so thick it pressed hard against my ribs until I felt my pulse stumble. The darkness outside the glass felt less like water, and more like something alive, stretching out forever, yet leaning close enough to press its unseen gaze against the hull. A slow shift of pressure brushed the vessel, almost gentle, but heavy enough to make the air thicken with quiet drip. The faintest shimmer moved through the black, drifting in patterns too deliberate to ignore, as though the deep studied every movement inside the cabin. I held still, breath caught halfway, watching shapes that shouldn't exist slip past the window with silent intent, and a cold realization settled over me. Whatever waited beyond the glass wasn't simply watching. It was learning. The moment the new signal bled through the consoles, the entire cabin seemed to stiffen around it, as if even the metal sensed something wrong. The sound pulsed in uneven waves, soft at first, but each echo carried a strange pull that made the room feel smaller, and the air too heavy to breathe comfortably. Every flicker of the overhead lights deepened the shadows until they crawled across the walls, like slow-moving shapes trying to stay unseen. I watched the readings twist into patterns I couldn't explain, bending in ways that suggested the signal didn't come from outside the vessel, but from somewhere buried deeper in the dark. A low thrum rolled beneath the floor, rattling bolts in a rhythm that matched the echo on the speakers. The pressure felt sharper now, almost personal, as though the deep was trying to form a message, one chilling piece at a time. The long corridor stretched ahead like a hollow throat, and with each step the air shifted in a way that felt almost alive, brushing against my skin, as though the passage exhaled. The lights flickered in slow rhythm, dimming and brightening like a fading heartbeat struggling to keep time. Every small creak in the hall echoed down the metal walls, turning into whispers that seemed to slip past my ears. The deeper I walked, the more the shadows stretched, pulling away from the corners as though they feared what followed behind me. Something faint brushed the back of my mind, a sense that the darkness wasn't empty at all, but waiting, patient, and curious. When a sudden trembling ran through the floor, it felt like a warning, too soft to understand yet too real to ignore. The radio hissed again, not in the soft, uneven waves from before, but in a steady grind that scraped through the silence like teeth on metal. Beneath the harsh noise, something shifted, an almost voice buried deep inside the static, rising and falling like it struggled to push through barriers not meant to break. I leaned closer, and the sound bent around me as though it sensed attention, pulling my focus deeper into its hidden rhythm. The cabin tightened with a strange tension, heavy enough to press against my ribs and slow the air in my lungs. A faint vibration rolled through the deck, syncing perfectly with the pulse inside the static, and for a moment, it felt like the sound formed the shape of a question aimed straight at me. But before I could make sense of it, the signal cut off with a sharp snap that left the silence colder than before. The digital map flickered as though underwater, lines bending and stretching in shapes that didn't match any known depth charts. And I felt a cold pulse rise through the room as the coordinates shifted on their own. The numbers crawled across the screen, rearranging themselves into a new pattern that tugged at my focus with quiet insistence, calling attention to a point far deeper than our recorded position. Every time I blinked, the shapes seemed to twist again, almost like they reacted to being watched. The metal around me groaned, as if the vessel resented being dragged toward the impossible marker forming in front of me. A faint hum grew under the floor, one I could feel in my bones, and I sensed the map wasn't showing a location. It was showing an invitation. The pressure outside began to climb without warning, pushing against the hull in slow, crushing waves that pulsed like a heartbeat out of sync with anything human. Each throb rattled through the vessel, turning every bolt and steel plate into a trembling reminder of how fragile the boundary was between us and the endless dark. The lights dimmed with each surge, falling into a low flicker that painted the room with shivering shadows. I could feel something shifting out there, not a current or a creature, but a presence that seemed to circle the submarine with careful intent. Every breath inside the cabin felt borrowed, and every sound hinted that the deep had found us again. Closer this time, and unwilling to let go. The next pulse hit harder, as though knocking for a response. The ocean around the vessel began to shift in a way that felt unnatural, turning the dark water into slow, deliberate currents that pressed against the hull like something alive, trying to steer us. The vessel groaned with each push, the metal stretching in uneasy whispers as the lights flickered overhead, casting the room in trembling waves of pale blue. Every subtle tilt made it clear we weren't drifting by accident. Something outside nudged the submarine with an intent that crawled across my skin. The silence between the soft creaks felt too heavy, as though the deep listened for our every breath. A quiet rumble rolled through the floor, not from the engines, but from something beneath us, and I felt an invisible pull, urging the vessel toward a direction no map dared to show. Whatever moved the water wasn't wind or current, it was will. The viewing port darkened as something massive drifted past, blocking what little glow filtered through the depths. At first, it looked like a patch of shadow, but the way it moved, slow, smooth, too controlled, sent a cold spike of fear through my chest. The glass trembled with each silent pass, carrying a pressure that felt almost like a presence pressing its face against the window. Every breath in the cabin grew tight, matching the steady pulse of whatever circled us, and the air carried a charged stillness, as if waiting for the shadow to finish choosing its next move. A faint shimmer along its edge hinted at a shape we weren't meant to understand, bending the light in ways that made the water around it twist. I felt its attention settle on us, quiet and heavy, like an eye opening in the dark. The digital log screen blinked to life without a single touch, letters forming in slow, deliberate strokes that crawled across the display, like they were being typed by unseen hands. The air cooled as each word appeared, and the quiet hum of the systems dropped into a low whisper, leaving the room so still I could hear my own heartbeat stumbling. The messages didn't resemble any system alert or mechanical readout. They felt more like sentences pulled from a place that shouldn't know anything about us. The words shifted and warped, rewriting themselves between blinks, each new line hinting at something watching from the other side of the dark. A chill swept through me as the screen paused, waiting as though expecting a reply I couldn't give. And then the final line appeared. Short, simple, and impossible. The hull began to vibrate in a slow rhythm. Not like the usual tremors from shifting pressure, but like a pattern tapping from within the metal itself. Each pulse traveled through the floor and up the walls, as though the submarine carried an echo of something long forgotten. The sound was soft, almost gentle, yet it carried familiarity that tightened my throat in a way I couldn't explain. The lights dimmed to a low glow that made the room feel older, as if the vessel remembered places we had never traveled. Memories whispered through steel plates and bolts. The tapping grew more distinct, forming a rhythm too precise to be random, and I felt a quiet dread bloom as the pattern matched the same strange cadence we heard through the static. It wasn't the ocean speaking now. It was the ship. The floor beneath us trembled with a deep, steady pressure that felt different from any natural shift in the water. It carried a pull that made my stomach twist, drawing attention downward as though the ocean itself wanted us to sense something hidden below. When the lower display activated on its own, the lights flickered before revealing a new chart, a map layered beneath our current one, showing depths far beyond anything recorded. The lines bent in strange spirals, almost organic, and the center pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. A creeping chill spread through the cabin as the symbol at the center brightened, marking a point we should never reach. Yet with each pulse of pressure outside, the vessel seemed nudged closer, as if the deep insisted on leading us to a place it had been waiting to reveal. The moment the new pulse rose through the hull, the air in the cabin tightened, as if the deep had finally gathered enough strength to answer the questions we never meant to ask. The sound wasn't a knock or a whisper this time. It was a long, low call that pressed against the vessel with a slow, hungry patience. The lights dimmed to a faint, trembling glow, and every shadow stretched thin across the metal like they were being drawn toward the dark outside. The pressure pushed harder with each passing second, making the vessel feel smaller, as though the ocean wanted to fold the steel walls inward. A strange calm drifted through the room, not comforting but heavy. Like the quiet that settles before a door opens to something waiting on the other side. The call grew sharper, and I could feel it in my bones, urging us downward. As I stepped into the corridor, the air felt wrong, thicker, colder, as though something invisible drifted through it with slow, careful movements. A faint echo followed each step, but the sound didn't match my pace. It lagged behind, then quickened as if mimicking my path before trying to lead ahead. The lights flickered in long stretches, leaving sections of the passage swallowed by shifting shadows that seemed to rearrange themselves when the dark swallowed them. Each breath tasted metallic, carrying a scent like old water trapped behind walls. A deep hum vibrated along the floor, rising and falling in a pattern that felt almost like a voice clearing its throat in the dark. The longer I walked, the more the corridor seemed to stretch, bending slightly as if guiding me to somewhere it remembered even if I didn't. The radio snapped alive with a harsh burst of static, louder than anything before, flooding the room with a sound that scraped along the walls like something trapped inside the wires. Beneath the roar, a faint shape formed. Not a voice this time, but something closer to breathing, uneven and strained. The noise bent and twisted, shaping itself into a pattern that made the cabin feel colder with each warped pulse. I leaned closer, despite the rising dread, drawn by the sense that the sound wanted to be understood. The static swelled again. And then, for one chilling moment, the noise folded into a shape that almost resembled a human cry. The signal flickered, and I felt the presence behind it, something trying to break through, something that had waited too long in the dark. The hull trembled again, not from pressure but from something deeper, a faint shiver that rippled through the metal like a memory surfacing after years of silence. The vibration traveled up the walls in delicate patterns, soft yet deliberate, like someone tracing slow circles just beneath the steel. The air thickened, with a warmth that didn't belong this far down, carrying a strange sense of familiarity that tightened my chest. I pressed my hand against the wall, and for a moment, it felt as though something on the other side pressed back. The lights dimmed until the room fell into a muted glow, and the metal under my palm pulsed with a rhythm that didn't belong to the vessel. It felt like the ship wasn't reacting to the deep. It was remembering it. A faint glow rose from the depths beneath the vessel, pushing through the black water in slow waves that carried a quiet, pulsing rhythm. At first it looked like drifting sediment catching stray reflections, but the light thickened into a soft, steady beam that reached upward as though calling to us. The water around the glow churned in gentle spirals, pulling the darkness inward until it shaped itself into a path leading down. The vessel creaked as if caught in a current that didn't exist moments before, and the glow grew bright enough to shimmer across the metal walls. A cold realization settled deep inside me. The light wasn't drifting toward the submarine. It was waiting for the submarine to follow it. The vessel drifted downward with a slow, steady pull that felt nothing like sinking and everything like being guided by invisible hands. The pressure tightened around the hull, not crushing but coaxing, almost gentle in a way that only made the fear coil tighter in my chest. The faint glow beneath us brightened with each meter we descended, casting long, trembling beams across the walls, as if the deep wanted to show us something hidden in its oldest chambers. The silence inside the vessel thickened until every tiny creak sounded like a warning. The water outside moved in slow spirals that never broke apart, swirling with a strange patience that felt alive. With each passing moment, the dread grew sharper, whispering that whatever waited below had been calling us for far longer than we realized. As the light grew clearer, a massive shape formed beneath the glow. Too large to understand, too slow to be just a drift of rock. The shape pulsed as though it breathed, sending faint ripples through the surrounding water that brushed against the hull like fingertips testing the metal. The closer we drew, the more the glow sharpened into patterns swirling across its surface, lines that twisted in ways that made my mind stumble just trying to follow them. A quiet tremor rolled through the vessel, as though responding to the presence below. The air inside the cabin grew colder with each pulse of the shape, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the deep had carved this thing long before any map existed, waiting for the time it could be found again. Nothing about it felt natural, yet everything about it felt aware. The vessel eased into a hollow in the water, where the light bent strangely, curving as though it slipped around unseen walls. The pressure felt different here, lighter in some places, crushing in others, creating silent waves that pushed gently against the hull in uneven rhythms. The glow revealed a circular space that didn't look carved by nature. The water inside held stillness that felt intentional. The quiet grew sharper, cutting through the cabin like a held breath, and the soft hum beneath the floor shifted into a pattern that seemed almost familiar. Each pulse echoed faintly through the metal, forming a rhythm that made the air feel charged, as though the chamber itself listened. I felt a strange pull deep inside, not from fear but from something that felt almost like recognition, though I couldn't explain why. A soft thud echoed beneath the floor, followed by another, forming a slow pattern that traveled through the hull like a coded message from something waiting just outside. The metal vibrated with each hit, but instead of fear, a strange clarity slid through the tension, a sense that these sounds weren't meant to frighten but to guide. The rhythm repeated again, steady and deliberate, matching the same pulse we had heard through the static earlier in the journey. The lights flickered as though reacting to the pattern, dimming in the exact same intervals. The silence between each thud held a weight that made my chest tighten, not from panic, but from a sinking understanding that the deep wasn't trying to trap us. It was trying to tell us something it had no other way to say. The vessel began to drop again, but this time the movement didn't feel forced. It felt chosen. The pull from below strengthened into a steady, unbroken drag that carried us deeper than any measure should have allowed. The glow around us expanded, wrapping the metal walls in soft, wavering light that made the cabin feel suspended inside something alive. The instruments flickered with readings that twisted into symbols rather than numbers, as though the deep remembered an old language we were never meant to see. The water outside darkened again, not from lack of light, but from something massive shifting into place beneath us. The descent felt like crossing a threshold, each meter peeling back layers of silence until the deep no longer felt empty. It felt ready. The glow thickened until it wrapped the vessel like a sleepless fog, and in the soft waves of shifting light, a shape began to form beneath us. It wasn't a structure or a rock, but something flatter, wider, almost like a giant door carved into the ocean floor. The water trembled around it in delicate ripples, as though the deep itself was breathing slower, now, preparing for something it had waited too long to reveal. The vessel hovered above the shape without losing balance, suspended in an unnatural stillness that made my stomach tighten. I felt the pressure change, not in weight, but in mood, like the ocean had stepped closer, watching. A soft vibration rose through the floor, steady and patient, guiding us to look down. Whatever waited beneath that glow was not asleep. It was listening. A deep, hollow boom rose from the structure below, rolling through the water in a slow wave that struck the hull like a distant heartbeat. The sound didn't fade. It returned, echoing back from the metal walls as though the vessel answered without meaning to. The rhythm repeated again, louder this time, sending a quiver through the air that made the lights flicker in perfect sync. Each pulse carried a strange warmth that slipped beneath my skin, pulling up memories I didn't recognize, images that flickered too quickly to understand. The silence afterward stretched tight, waiting for breath, waiting for choice. A new echo rose, so soft it barely existed, yet it held the clear shape of intention. The deep wasn't just calling. It expected a reply. The glow beneath the vessel sharpened until it seemed to stare upward, forming a beam that reached toward us with slow, searching movements. The light bent around the hull, tracing its shape like fingers sliding over metal, sinking into every bolt, every seam, every forgotten dent. The air inside the cabin grew warmer as the light pressed closer, revealing tiny, drifting particles that moved as though drawn to us, circling in gentle spirals. Shadows twisted on the floor, warping into faint patterns that made the room feel older, as if the light uncovered memories hidden in the steel. Each pulse from below came faster now, forming a rhythm that matched the silent tension building inside my chest. The deep wasn't trying to see us. It already knew us. The floor shook with a sudden jolt, not violent but precise, as though something beneath the vessel had unlocked. A long groan rippled through the water, deep and ancient, followed by the slow shift of the massive structure below as it began to open. The light inside the widening gap pulsed with a rhythm that made my heart stumble, and the water around us swirled in gentle spirals that pulled the vessel downward inch by inch. The air tasted colder, sharper, carrying a faint echo I felt more than heard. The deep had been patient. It had waited for the right moment, the right pressure, the right silence, and now that silence was breaking. As the opening widened, the glow spilled upward like breath from something waking. The vessel lurched gently as the pull from below tightened, guiding us into the widening gap with smooth, steady force that left no room for resistance. The glow inside the opening shifted into warm currents that wrapped around the hull like welcoming arms, yet their touch carried a weight that chilled the air in my lungs. Instruments flickered with symbols instead of readings, drifting across the screens like thoughts shaped by the deep. The walls creaked with a sound, too soft to be strain, more like anticipation. The descent deepened, the pressure changing in slow waves that felt almost like breathing. Every part of the vessel seemed to lean forward, drawn into the unknown space below, and as the darkness closed behind us, it felt less like entering a cavern, and more like being swallowed. The vessel settled into a space so calm it felt wrong, a hollow pocket of water where the pressure softened instead of crushing, as though something shielded us with deliberate care. The glow surrounding the walls pulsed in slow waves that matched a rhythm too steady to be natural, and the silence inside the cabin grew thick enough to feel on my skin. The water outside shimmered with drifting patterns that curled inward, like breath drawn by an unseen chest. Every flicker of light shifted the darkness beyond the glass into shapes that almost resembled walls. Massive, curved, patient. A soft vibration rose through the floor, steady and warm, like a heartbeat echoing through bone. It felt impossible. Yet the more the pulses repeated, the more certain I became. The place we had entered wasn't a cavern. It was alive. A pressure built in the air, not painful but heavy, settling across my shoulders like a silent hand urging stillness. The lights dimmed until only faint outlines remained, and the glow outside pulsed in long, soft waves that felt like thought forming in slow motion. Something touched the edge of my mind. Not a sound, not a word, but a feeling shaped into direction. Images flickered behind my eyes, swirling currents, drifting shapes, endless dark folding into itself. None of it made sense, yet every image carried a strange familiarity, as if the deep had pulled memories from places I never knew existed. The silence deepened until it felt alive, pressing close, steady, patient. Whatever waited inside that glow wasn't speaking. It was showing. The images grew sharper until they no longer felt like visions, but like memories pressed into my mind from something vast and ancient. I saw swirling ruins hidden beneath miles of dark water, shapes drifting through trenches untouched by sunlight, and a pattern of light that curved through the deep like a language older than any map. The pulses around the vessel matched the rhythm of the images, guiding them into place until they formed a clear path, one that led to the glowing structure we hovered inside. A strange calm fell over me, deep and unsettling, as though the ocean wanted me to understand that none of this was new. This place had been waiting long before our vessel was ever built, and the moment we heard that first whisper through the sonar, we were already part of its memory. The glow beneath the vessel thickened, rising in long spirals that drifted in patterns too deliberate to be random. The water trembled as though the entire chamber inhaled, and the pulsing light shifted into a steady rhythm that made the walls seem to breathe. The deeper I looked, the clearer the truth became. The massive shape below us wasn't a structure. It was the top of something immense, something resting in the darkness, as though trapped between sleep and waking. The glow formed lines that wrapped around its surface like scars from another age, each one flickering with faint light. A chill climbed my spine as the pulses reached upward, brushing against the vessel with a soft touch that felt like recognition. This wasn't a discovery. It was a reunion. The chamber thrummed with a rising pulse that shook the walls in slow, growing waves, each one warmer than the last. The glow intensified until the dark water shimmered like liquid glass, revealing the full outline of the colossal shape beneath us. A deep vibration rolled through the vessel, gentle yet certain, and the water parted around the form as it began to rise. The air inside the cabin thickened with a pressure that felt almost emotional, a weight that carried both warning and welcome. Every instinct told me to turn back, but something deeper whispered that turning back had never been an option. As the shape lifted toward the vessel, the glow wrapped around us with soft, undeniable purpose. The deep wasn't calling anymore. It was waking up,